Good morning and welcome to Strat-based ADR Institute's virtual roundtable discussion entitled The Voice of the Filipino People, a Post-Election Assessment. I am Dr. Francisco Kiko Magno, Trustee and Program Convener of the Strat-based ADR Institute and a Professor of Political Science at De La Salle University, and I will be your moderator for this event. The Strat-based ADR Institute, together with Democracy Watch Philippines, is holding this virtual town hall event to present the results of a commission study on the Filipino voters' perception of the conduct and legitimacy of the 2022 national elections. Election experts and democracy advocates from the academe, civil society, and government will engage in a deep dive discussion to give their insightful analysis of the survey data and important lessons that can improve the administration and voter experience of the automated election system. We hope that this event will be an avenue for the objective and constructive review of the recent polls. We also hope to extract meaningful inputs to further strengthen our democratic institutions as we continue to move our country forward in these difficult times. To formally begin the program, may I call on the lead convener of Democracy Watch Philippines to deliver the welcome remarks. Before I call on him, I would like to introduce him as the Executive Director of the think tank Strat-based ADRi, or ADR Institute. He is a graduate of Leiden University in the Netherlands, where he earned his Master's of Science degree in Public Administration, specializing in public management. He also holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Public Administration and a Master's degree in Technology Management from the University of the Philippines in Diliman. Ladies and gentlemen, may I call on Mr. Paco Pangalangan, the lead convener of Democracy Watch Philippines, to provide us his welcome remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Magno. Our moderator, Dr. Kiko Magno, Strat-based ADRi President, Nido Manhit, Comelec Commissioner Socorro Inting, and Spokesperson Attorney John Rex Laudianco, PPCRB Chairperson, Myla Villanueva, Lente Executive Director, Attorney Ona Caritos, our partners and participants here this morning, good morning and welcome. Good morning and welcome to today's virtual town hall discussion on the voice of the Filipino people, a post-elections assessment. Democracy Watch has worked on its election advocacy since 2015. In the lead up to the 2022 elections, we worked with no less than the Comelec, the private sector, faith-based groups, CSOs, schools, and students to make the elections more transparent and credible. However, at the same time, we recognize that election work is not only limited to the election period. And like any other endeavor, it is important that we must take stock of the big and small victories, as well as the areas where we can improve before the next elections. In terms of the 2022 elections, let's start with the victories. First off, I think, is the high political interest that Filipinos showed in the elections. It's important that we keep in mind that for the last 2.5 years, we've actually been in a pandemic, COVID. And I think it is because of the health and safety protocols implemented by the Comelec and its civil society partners that we actually made history. Hold on, am I Are there any technical difficulties? No?
Yeah,
we can hear you. We can hear you.
we can hear.
Okay. Sorry. Just one of those things. I have to ask sometimes because it's Zoom. Again, sorry, I'll go back. That we made history with an 83% voter turnout. This is the highest turnout in the automated election history in the country. We've even surpassed the 81.95% turnout rate during the 2016 presidential elections. Another victory, I think, is that the election results were accepted and were viewed as credible. While the campaign was heated, parallel vote counts and manual audits affirmed the results of the elections. In addition, survey data commissioned by Stratbase ADRi shows that majority of Filipinos trust the results of the 2022 automated elections. I won't go into further details, as we are fortunate enough to have Professor Holmes of Pulse Asia here to walk us through all the intricacies of the data. But I wanted to note that in 2019, 80% of Filipinos said that they trusted the results. In 2016, it was 74. And for 2022, we see that continued trend of growing trust in the results of automated elections. For us, this signals Filipinos' satisfaction with the existing automated election system and their dislike to return to previous manual systems of voting marred by guns, goons, and gold, and by slow or delayed results. In fact, the high trust and credibility of PH elections is comparable to more democratic countries like Luxembourg, New Zealand, and even higher than in the Netherlands and Ireland. That said, elections were not without issues. While few and far between, there were some reports of long lines and issues with a few voting machines. There were still, based on the Comelix reports, incidents of election-related violence. Of course, we also saw the videos circulating on social media of blatant and normalized vote buying. But perhaps the elephant in the room, so to speak, when it comes to the 2022 elections was the role of disinformation in shaping how Filipinos understand issues and ultimately behaved at the polls. And going back to what I said earlier about elections work not being limited to campaign periods or even election years, this issue has to do with a larger information ecosystem as a whole. More and more, Filipinos are turning to online sources for information. Journalism and traditional media are under attack, and civil society voices risk being drowned out. This issue requires more than just voter education and digital literacy. It demands media literacy, broader civic education, and more engaged multi-sectoral collaboration. As the new administration begins its 6-year term, we at Democracy Watch and Stratbase ADRi wish to present the results of our commission study on the Filipino voters' perception of the conduct and legitimacy of the 2022 national elections. We hope that through this event, our experts and the discourse our expert speakers and the discourse it creates, we can understand opportunities to make our elections more effective and meaningful for the Filipino people. Again, thank you for our speakers and participants for being here, and welcome to today's virtual event. Dr. Magna?
Thank you very much, Paco, for providing us the scope of the issues that we shall discuss this morning. So we have our experts in our panel. But before we do that, let us hear from the results of the study commissioned by Stratbase ADRi on the citizens' perceptions of the election. So to lead us in this discussion is the president of Pulse Asia Research Incorporated. His research interests include public finance, public opinion, and the field of comparative politics, especially on democratization and political contestation. He is a colleague and is a full professor of political science and development studies at the De La Salle University. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm very honored to present to you Dr. Ronnie Holmes, the president of Pulse Asia. Ronnie.
Good morning to everyone, and thanks to Stratbase ADRi. Good morning to Commissioner Inting. Good morning to Myla Villanueva, to Attorney Caritos and the others who are here. So as mentioned from the introduction, we are here to present the result of the questions that were posed, commissioned by Stratbase in our June 2022 Ulat ng Bayan survey. This is a regular survey that we conduct. This is the second quarter survey for this year. So this is the post-election public opinion. The survey was conducted in late June, from June 24 to 27. We had a number of 1,200 respondents randomly selected across the country. The survey's margin of error at 95% confidence level is about 1,200, plus minus 3%. I hope the slides are shown. Is it?
Yes.
So let me go and proceed first to a staple question that we asked in our survey. This is with respect to certain standards of the elections, and we try to ask respondents to compare the elections that just occurred, the 2022 elections, with the prior elections. And the question is what you find there. Batay sa mga sumusunod na pamantayan o standards sa pangkabuuan, paano nyo ikukumpara ang eleksyon ito ng Mayo 2022 sa nakaraang eleksyon ng Mayo 2016? Simulan po natin sa the first one is with regard to cheating or the presence of cheating, yung pagkakaroon ng dayaan. One can see from the first part of this particular slide that with respect to the presence of cheating, a plurality felt that there was less cheating in the 2022 election, that's 39%, although the figure is slightly lower in the Visayas at 29% here, and slightly higher in Mindanao at 47%. But you have about 4 of 10 Filipinos saying that there was less cheating in the 2022 elections relative to the 2016 election. The other one would be in terms of same as before, but with little cheating. So in 2016, there were people who said that there was not that much cheating that happened. So 16% of the public felt that there was cheating in the 2022 election, but the level was something that is considered as little or insignificant. So as a whole, you have about majority saying that cheating was not as pervasive in the 2022 election compared to the 2016 elections. The second question would be with respect to the pace of counting for presidential, vice presidential, senatorial, the party list groups, and local elections. When asked with regard to the speed of counting of votes in the 2022 elections, 86% of the respondents felt that the speed of counting in the 2022 elections was faster than the 2016 elections. This is quite a significant number. As Paco mentioned, we have done similar surveys in the past, and these are our own surveys. In the past, we did not reach 80% in terms of saying that the count was as fast as much faster than in the previous election. So I think this is something that can be based largely on the fact that on the night of election itself, we did get a glimpse of a significant proportion of the votes, at least for the national office, that were projected in the, by the COMELEC to the transparency survey. With regard to the credibility of results, the last standard that we measured here, 67% of the respondents felt that the results were more credible now than the 2016 elections. 18% are saying that it's as credible as before. So if you look at this one, that's about 8 out of 10, more than 8 out of 10 Filipinos saying that the results were credible. Although the credibility of results, you have still a majority, but it is lower in the balance of Luzon. When we try to look at the data in the balance of Luzon, we see a lower figure posted in terms of the belief on the credibility of the elections, of the results of the elections coming from Region 5, which is the Bicol region. So there you have about, in the balance of Luzon, however, you have 59% still saying that the results were more credible now, about 90% saying that it's as credible as before. So on the 3 standards here of the elections, what we do establish is that the Filipinos generally feel that the cheating is less pervasive in the 2022 elections. The vote count was faster, and the results remain credible. Let me now go to the next part of the survey results. We asked them whether they're satisfied or dissatisfied with the automated polling or counting of votes to the vote counting machines. We find here that 9 out of 10 Filipinos are satisfied with the vote counting machines. Significantly higher number in Mindanao, where you have 99% expressing satisfaction with the vote counting machine. The figures do not vary as much in other geographical areas in the National Capital Region, in the balance of Luzon, or the Visayas, and neither do they vary in terms of socioeconomic class from A, B, C, D, and E. Dissatisfaction is at a single digit, that's at 4%, the one that you find here. and there is no one who expressed dissatisfaction in Mindanao. If you apply the margin of error, essentially, there's not much dissatisfaction expressed by Filipinos with regard to the vote counting machines or the automated vote count. The next one was a question on whether they found it easy or difficult to use the vote counting machines. And again, 9 out of 10 Filipinos said that it was easy to use the vote counting machines. There's no variance across areas. You find here NCR 95%, the balance of Luzon at 88%, the Visayas at 96%, and Mindanao at 97%. The level of ease in terms of use of the VCM is also expressed at the same proportion by Filipinos regardless of socio-economic class, whether it's A, B, C, D, and E. I think this being, if I'm not mistaken, the 4th time that we've been using the same system. Filipinos have gotten used to vote counting machines in terms of feeding their ballot, or even just simply completing the ballot for that matter. Yeah. Let me just go back. You have about 1% expressing a problem feeding the ballot, and this is expressed by 2% of the respondents in the balance of Luzon. Now, this is one of the questions that was we posed for a stat-based ADRi, whether people have a small or big trust on the results of the 2022 elections, whether these were accurate enough so that they can be regarded as credible. And you see here that the level of trust is still significant, significant majority trust the results of the elections, that they're accurate and thereby credible. 82% said that the results can be trusted. About 3 out of 10 said had very big trust, and majority had big trust in terms of the accuracy and subsequently the credibility of the results. The number, as the figure is lower again in the balance of Luzon, where you have 73% expressing trust as regards to accuracy and credibility of the elections, although it's higher again in Mindanao at 96%. Similar to the question that we posed earlier, which is in general on the credibility of results, while this question of stat-based was more in terms of the accuracy, you only have 4% saying that they have small or no trust, which again is a very low number, given the fact, you know, if you apply the survey margin of error, this can go up to 7% or can go down to 1% of the Filipino adult population. The next question also that was one for stat-based would be in terms of the benefit of the automation of elections in the Philippines. We've done this in the previous elections, and we find out in the 2022 survey that the primary benefit that people see with regard to the automation of the vote count is that the results are faster. 72%, almost the same as what we had in 2019, are saying that faster results would be the primary benefit of the automation of the vote count. Ease of voting, 15%, almost the same figure that you see across all areas. And the credibility of the results is also identified as one of the benefits of by 11% of the Filipino public. The last question that we posed for stat-based ADRi is whether they would want to see a continuation of the automated vote count in future elections or not. While there is the continuing debate as regards the importance of continuing or looking for a different system, you still have 9 out of 10 Filipinos saying that the automated vote count should continue in future elections. You do have a slight variance here against the balance of Luzon. Filipinos in the balance of Luzon are less positive about or less inclined to have this continue, but that's still 82%. That's still a significant majority of the voters in the balance of Luzon. So even if we have a statistically significant figure in terms of a decline, in terms of agreement to this question in the balance of Luzon, that's still a significant majority of the voters in the balance of Luzon. Finally, I'd like to share some of our own data with regard to questions or statements that we asked the respondents whether they agree or disagree with this statement. The first statement is, mas kinulang ang diskusyon ng mga mahalagang issue at programa ng mga kandidato sa eleksyon ng 2022 kaysa manakalang eleksyon. If people agree with this one, that means the discussions leading up to the elections in 2022 were not as substantive as they were in 2016. If people disagree with this, that means they felt that the discussions of issues and programs was substantive running up to the 2022 elections. What we see here is somehow of a split, but you still have a majority disagreeing with the statement. A plurality disagreeing with the statement, meaning to say about 4 out of 10 Filipinos felt that the discussion of important issues and programs in the 2022 elections was quite substantive. The second statement, hindi pantay o hindi balanse ang pag-ulat ng pinakama-impluwensyang media sa kampanya at bilangan sa nakaraang eleksyon. So agreement with this statement would mean that people felt that media was biased and not necessarily fair with regard to the reporting of the campaign and the counting in the recently concluded elections. Disagreement would mean that they feel that the media or the most influential practitioners in media were fair and balanced. And you see again that the plurality were in agreement, although you have 32% in disagreement, and you have 32% agreeing with this statement. So again, this is a split. But generally, 4 out of 10 Filipinos felt that media practitioners were fair or balanced in their reporting during the last elections. The last statement is a statement where we ask people whether kung ang nakaraang halalan ay pinaigting ang mga dibisyon o pagkakahati-hati ng ating lipunan. So this is a question on divisiveness. We wanted to find out whether people felt that the last election was polarizing or divisive. And you have an agreement here of 41%. So a plurality of Filipinos felt that the elections was quite divisive. About 1 out of 4, 24% disagreed with this one, and 36% are undecided. Those are the results of our June 2022 post-election assessment. Maraming salamat ulit sa inyong lahat, and I would definitely wish to hear the comments of the experts, and we will entertain the questions later. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Dr. Holmes, for that presentation. I'm sure it will generate a lot of discussions with our panel here and also our audience. So let us start with the examination of these results. And we're very fortunate this morning that we have Commissioner Socorro Inting of the Commission on Elections, together with Attorney John Rex Lodianco, spokesperson of the Commission on Elections, to provide us with their post-election verification and assessment remarks. Commissioner Inting, good morning.
Good morning. Do I have now the floor?
Yes, Commissioner Inting, you can proceed.
Okay. The president of Strat-Based ADR Institute, Professor Victor Andres Manhit, the lead convener of Democracy Watch Philippines, Mr. Francesco Javier Pangalangan, the president of Pulse Asia Research Incorporated, Dr. Ronald Holmes, the chairperson of the Paris Pastoral Council for Responsible Voting, popularly known as PPCRV, Ms. Mayla Villanueva, the executive director of the Legal Network for Truthful Elections, or LENTE, Attorney Ona Caritos, our dear participants in this virtual event, fellow election workers, stakeholders, and friends, good morning to all of you. First of all, I wish to convey my heartfelt gratitude to the esteemed individuals behind Strat-Based ADR Institute and Democracy Watch Philippines for inviting me as one of your speakers in this virtual town hall discussion. I consider it a great honor to be in the company of recognized figures who are at the forefront of election reform in this country. I still vividly recall that during the preparations for the 2022 national and local elections, the COMELEC and DemWatch inked a memorandum of agreement concerning a voter education campaign, which was specifically geared for the Filipino youth and first-time voters. This time around, post-election, your organization has again proven true to its commitment to electoral reform for holding this virtual event, which is designed to assess the conduct and the results of the previous polls. I would like to impress upon our virtual participants, most especially the young voters, that the nation is counting on you, not just in the responsibilities you are going to take in the future, but also in the choices that you make today. Your participation in today's event clearly indicates your patriotism. After all, one of the hallmarks of love of country is active participation in its political affairs, which is manifested in attending events such as this virtual town hall discussion on post-election assessments. At this juncture, I will now attempt to give you my humble take on the recently concluded 2022 national and local elections in relation to the topic assigned to me, post-election verification and assessment. First, while the 2022 NLE is far from being perfect, the situations on the ground on election day reflect a generally successful conduct of the polls. Save for a few isolated incidents, reports from our field offices indicate that Filipino voters were actually able to cast their votes, feed their ballots into the machines, and obtain receipts accurately reflecting the votes they just cast. However, your COMELEC is not oblivious to reports of malfunctioning secured digital cards and vote counting machines in some polling precincts. These issues reportedly included paper jams, rejected ballots, VCM scanner malfunctions, and machines which are not printing accurately. Allegedly, such concerns affected almost 1% of all the VCMs that were used in the previous polls. However, it will be unfair on the part of the COMELEC to be judged over such a minuscule figure or percentage of malfunctioning VCMs. After all, the other side of the coin is the 99% of VCMs which properly function. Additionally, as to those that allegedly malfunction, rest assured that our field offices have responded to each and every problem by either repairing or replacing the affected units on election day. The above concern about the VCMs, while eventually remedied by the Commission's technical personnel, somehow highlights the fact that our VCMs might have suffered over time. Of the 107,345 VCMs used for the 2022 elections, 97,345 units were already used in the past 2 elections. I am not in any way prematurely deciding or influencing the policy direction of the Commission on and Bank, but I think everyone will agree to a meticulous discussion and review about the propriety of using these VCMs for future elections. On another note, a lot of voters were hesitant to surrendering their ballots to the poll workers in precincts where the SD card or the VCM malfunctioned. Some resorted to venting their frustrations on social media and unnecessarily magnified the issue. However, in the event of malfunctioning equipment, a contingency procedure as per COMELEC Resolution number 10759 is provided. In case the VCM malfunctions, the voter has two options. One, proceed with voting, but agree to sign a waiver of their right to be issued a receipt. The Electoral Board will then batch feed the ballots before the polls close. Or two, wait for the VCM malfunction issue to be resolved so they could personally feed the ballots. Any apprehension that the voter may have relative to the batch feeding of the ballots is essentially foreclosed because of the presence of watchers during the performance of this contingency procedure. Such presence of watchers, is strictly required by COMELEC Resolution number 10759. Second, on the aspect of transmission of election results, the COMELEC is pleased to announce that the transmission of the 2022 election returns is way faster than that of the 2019 elections. Unfortunately, on the aspect of transmission of election results, the COMELEC, despite the record-breaking performance of the Commission relative to the transmission rate, a lot are still raising their eyebrows. Many have been baffled on how the election returns have been transmitted so quickly this election, as it usually takes days for ERs to be transmitted in the past elections. Pag mabagal ang transmission, madaming reklamo. Pag mabilis ang transmission, may pagdududa. For the record, your COMELEC has already addressed the choke points in transmission which existed during the 2019 polls. Modesty aside, the record-breaking swift transmission of election results is mainly due to the preparations made by the Commission. In particular, the COMELEC enacted enhanced terms of reference in the transmission contract, which included that the media server shall prevent a 7-hour glitch. The COMELEC likewise conducted a stress test of all the VCMs using dummy test data that are sending simultaneously. Additionally, during mock election and field tests, the COMELEC used the actual data center to test its connectivity. Fast transmission was likewise facilitated by the repairs of the VCM transmission USB ports, as well as the early establishment of data centers. Couple these preparations by the poll body with the improved services of our telecommunication firms, and you have the fastest transmission rate of election results in the history of our country. As of 4 p.m. on Tuesday, May 10, 2022, 104,717 or 98.62% of the total 106,174 clustered servers have already sent their election returns. Hopefully, this noteworthy performance relative to transmission will be replicated, if not surpassed, in the next elections. Lastly, I am aware that the subject of result accuracy will be tackled by the next speaker from PPCRV. However, since it is closely related to the quality, functionality, and performance of the VCMs used by the COMELEC, please allow me to say a few words. The Random Manual Audit, or RMA, is the process which the Commission undertakes to determine whether the automated count of randomly selected VCMs is accurate based on the manual verification of the said count. Manual verification will be able to demonstrate that the ballots cast are true, accurate, and unaltered. Based on the report by the RMA committee, headed by Commissioner Amy Ferrolino, the random manual audit of votes matched 99.95% of the election returns in 746 randomly selected ballot boxes. The almost 100% accuracy of the random manual audit only proves that during the May 9, 2022 national and local elections, the VCMs correctly counted the votes that are reflected in the ballots. This figure effectively negates prevalent suspicions that the automated election system is flawed and susceptible to cheating. Because of the success of the random manual audit, our electoral system has again been proven to be reliable, and doubts about the results have effectively been erased. This development undeniably bolsters confidence and credibility in the conduct of the 2022 national and local elections. As we engage in a thorough assessment of the previous elections, we will be encountering numerous lessons along the way. However, these insights may only be used for the benefit of future elections. Let us take note of the inputs that we may gather from the 2022 elections and use them to our advantage as we prepare for the next national and local elections. With that, I'd like to say thank you very much for listening, and once again, good morning to all of you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Inting, for providing us with the assessment of the conduct of the elections and providing us with the data that supports the assessment of COMELEC. But we also have Attorney John Rex Lodianco, spokesperson of COMELEC. Attorney Rex, would you like to add more from what Commissioner Inting already presented?
Thank you very much, Dr. Magna. With your permission, I'll share my screen.
Yes.
Thank you. Is my screen visible now po?
Yes, it's visible.
Thank you very much po. First of all, my good morning to my acting chairperson, Commissioner Socorro Inting. Our gratitudes and appreciations, of course, to Professor Manhit, to Dr. Magna, of course, to Mr. Pangalangan, Dr. Holmes for that very kind presentation of the surveys regarding the elections. Chairperson Myla Villanueva, and of course our dear friend Attorney Ona Caritos of Lente. So to supplement what my chairperson had presented po regarding the elections, a quick view of our statistics. So of course we have 17 regions throughout the country composed of 81 provinces, cities in the number of 146, 1,488 municipalities, and 42,046 barangays. Of this, the COMELEC had established 407 precincts, wherein we had clustered them into 106,174, spaced into 37,224 voting centers. In addition, we have 63 overseas posts, consisting of 26 overseas posts using the automated election system, and the remaining are using the manual voting system. For the registered voters, the total of which in the May 9, 2022 elections is 67,525,619. For the local voters, we are composed of 65,745,526. The rest are on the screen, which I need not read aloud. Okay. For the age group, for those who are interested, the total composition of our voters is 33% belong to the 18 to 30 years old strat group. 51.4% is composed of the 31 to the 59 years old, and our senior citizens compose 15.6%. The distribution of our registered voters are 51.2% for the females and 48.8% for the males. So practically we're half and half of the registered voters. For the PWDs, we are 0.64%. Of course, in the indigenous peoples, it's 1.07%. Luzon comprises 29,322,208 voters. It's 44.6% of our voting population. In the Visayas, it's 13,441,808 or 20%, 0.4, and in Mindanao, 15,659,149. It's 23.8%. NCR is 11.1%. A total of 18,100 elective seats for 14 positions were vied for in the 2022 national and local elections, starting with the president up to the members of the Sangguniang Bayan and Sangguniang Panlungsod. So the total number of candidates that we have in all the official ballots is 46,168. As to the number of the certificates of candidacies filed together with the certificates of nominations and acceptance of nominations filed for the party list system, the total of 48,085 as processed by the Commission on Elections Law Department. Okay, additional statistics, we had in our disposition 318,000 electoral boards, 200,627 electoral board support staff, 38,989 DepEd supervising officers, or with what we call DESOs, and 87,082 support staff. For the canvassing boards, of course, we have one for the president and vice president, which is Congress. The party list, and for the senators is another one, the national board, which is composed by the Commission on Elections. The provincial boards, we have 81 of them, city boards, 146, the municipal boards, 1,488, and of course, one district board of canvassers for Taguig. Supplementing the preparations and the planning part, which were made by the Commission on Elections, first and foremost, it's our local source code review, participated in by 15 organizations and at least 54 individual local source code reviewers. The international certification for the second time in a row was provided by ProVNV of Alabama, USA. But this time there's something different. Aside from certifying the hardware and the servers, the VCMs, and the consolidation and canvassing machines, this time it's an end-to-end certification, including the transmission routers, the transmission servers, and all the facilities which were used in the AES. So lahat po were certified by ProVNV. That's why it took time for them to come out with the certification. But then again, the certification came out in time before the elections. Of course, all the final trusted build source codes were deposited in escrow in the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas as provided for in Republic Act 9369. The vote counting machines, as highlighted by Acting Chairperson in Ting, we had deployed 106,174 vote counting machines. In total, the COMELEC has 108,445 machines, 97,000 of which are actually owned by us already, and we had leased 11,100 to supplement the increase in the established precincts and provide for the contingencies. Unfortunately, due to the limited budget that the COMELEC has now, we were only able to field 1,100 machines as contingency, only 1%. In order to address the possible scenarios of failing and malfunctioning machines, the COMELEC had established repair hubs. 8 regional repair hubs were created. Before, in the past elections, we only have 1 repair hub in Santa Rosa, Laguna, but now we had established 8 VCM regional repair hubs, which had fast-tracked the repair of those which had malfunctioned. And we also constituted 83 technical hubs for SD cards. For SD cards to fail, practically we have 1 in every province. Knowing that these are machines, of course, the contingency plans were put into place. These are not new plans, if I may emphasize so. Contingency plans, whether the machines are new or refurbished or rebuilt, were made to ensure that the voting and the counting process shall continue in case there are malfunctions. For the 2022 national and local elections, we have Resolution 10759. As you could see on the screen, since the start of the automated elections, we already have promulgated continuity plan resolutions to address all possible scenarios in malfunctioning machines and SD cards. We likewise had established data centers, 1 in Taguig for the central one, backup center in Libis, Quezon City, and the transparency server in Parañaque. By way of preparations of all the components of the automated election systems, we had initiated an intensive battery of tests. Sabi nga po ng PNP nung nag-present po kami sa kanila, ang kulang na lang daw po yata sa ginawa namin test ay pregnancy test. But as you could see, everything were in place, from the stress test, from the technical evaluation committee validation, high availability test, failover test, connectivity test, transmission readiness test, of course, the standard pre-lat or pre-election logic and accuracy test, and the hardware admission test. To enable us to put into action all the plannings and the preparations made prior to elections, the COMELEC had conducted a voting simulation on October 23, 2021 in San Juan Elementary School. Not just resting on the output of the voting simulation, we had conducted another mock elections in 19 areas on December 29, 2021. For the vulnerable sectors, to show that these elections will be the most inclusive of all elections, we had established jail facilities as voting centers, 2,267. The indigenous peoples, we have 73 accessible voting centers. And for all the, I'm sorry, the PowerPoint kept moving on. The EAP, or the Emergency Accessible Polling Centers for all the vulnerable sectors, are provided for as 2,106. Given that the elections will remain to be in the pandemic setting, one of the elections conducted worldwide in the pandemic, we had to implement a variety of anti-COVID-19 measures, including the temperature scanning, of course, physical distancing, the barriers, as we could see, and as well as the isolation polling place. This is a first implemented nationwide. We had pilot tested it in the March 2021 Palawan plebiscite, and which was highly effective. So we implemented it in the 2022 national and local elections. Also, together with PPCRV, we had established the Voters Assistance Desk to minimize the time being spent by our voters looking for their precincts. For the turnout, as you could see, the highest ever in the history of elections, it's 83.07%. This is a series of the first and highest in all of the elections. In the overseas voting, this is likewise the highest, 38.61%. For the local voters, it's 84.10%. For the local absentee voting, again, first and highest, 88.72%. So to the total of 83.07%, as highlighted by the National Board of Canvassers for President and Vice President, it is indeed a history in the making. Okay, we have to mention the special elections in Lanao del Sur. Fortunately, there were no untoward incident, as proved by our series of preparations, including most especially the security preparations in the area. This is the only failure of elections, but we had immediately conducted the special elections therein, and the same was included in our canvas. For the peace and order situation, as you could see, in 2010, there are a total of 166 validated election-related incidents. In 2016, there are 133 validated election-related incidents. But for the 2022 national and local elections, only 27. This is the part wherein we seek further to improve in the coming elections. But then again, comparing from the 2010 and 2016 data, this is remarkably lower and the lowest ever election-related data that we have in all the succeeding elections. For our transmission, we had the 98% transmission, and this was further validated by the posting of all these transmitted results in the election results website. 100% of these transmitted were posted. Our boards of canvassers were likewise able to transmit to their respective provincial boards of canvassers 100%, and all the provincial and city boards of canvassers were able to transmit 100% to the National Board of Canvassers. As we look into the speed of the transmission, we were able to identify the following preparations made, which led to the efficiency and the fast speed of transmission. We had improved the VCM software. We likewise improved the transmission router, improved the specifications. Of course, we had utilized and capitalized on the existing 3G and 4G telco networks. So this resulted into a transmission of 84% of all election returns within 5 hours of closed voting. In fact, in a matter of 3 hours, we were able to notice 80% transmission doon po sa ating election results website. And the transmitted election returns 100% matched with the transmitted election returns in the server. It's a 1-to-1 match with the audited VCMs as well as the audited ERs as well as in the transmitted ERs. So as you could see, this is just a graphic presentation of the speed of the transmission compared to the other elections. I know this will be further discussed by our partner from Lente, but then again, allow us to present that in all the posts as audited, we had a highest accuracy rating of 99.9% above and across the board. Lastly, as we had mentioned, we have to admit that there were failures in the VCMs. But as you could see, on election day, only 477 VCMs or 0.45% failed. Yung pong ibang failures happened prior to election day during the final testing and sealing, which were readily addressed by our contingency, by our repair hubs. And we have to emphasize on election day, it's only 477 VCMs. For the SD cards, only 428 SD cards failed on election day, and they were readily configured in our 83 provincial repair hubs. Compared to 2019, we have 2,256 VCM failures and 1,400 SD card failures. So perhaps this is all the plannings, the preparations, and the implementations that we had made led to the post-evaluation of our stakeholders, wherein they cited this as the fastest and least violent in years. Likewise, earning the commendations from the US State Department and the Asian Network for Free Elections. Maraming salamat po at magandang umaga po sa ating lahat.
Maraming salamat. Thank you very much, Attorney John Rex Lojanco, for providing us with a comprehensive presentation of the election verification and assessment from the point of view of perspective of COMELEC. Thank you, Attorney Lojanco and Commissioner Inting. So at this point, let me now call on the chairperson of the Parish Pastoral Council for Responsible Voting, or PPCRV. She is the founder of 5 startup companies and is currently the chair of MDI Group, a leading digital transformation partner and technology innovator in the Philippines. Let me now call the chair of PPCRV, Ms. Myla Villanueva, to provide us with her perspective on voter turnout and result accuracy. Myla, please unmute yourself.
Good morning, everyone. I hope I'm coming in clear.
Yes.
Professor Dindo Manhit of the ADRi Institute, thank you for inviting me. And for good morning to all our esteemed guests and panelists, and to those watching today. I am very happy for the detail that Attorney Rex had provided and Commissioner Inting, Attorney John Rex Lojanco, because it gives a context of how much preparation we have gone through together with the COMELEC and other citizens' arms to provide the best possible experience for our voters, but for us at PPCRV to aim for our mission of clean, honest, accurate, meaningful, and peaceful elections. So let me take maybe 10 to 12 minutes and share some of the insights that we gained from this election cycle. So our work is actually defined also by law. We have been accredited by the Commission on Elections to be delivering on very, very specified acts and actions for the elections. I mentioned this because there was quite a lot of questions that reached us regarding the results, and some of which were really beyond our mandate. And so it's best to clarify how we cooperate with the COMELEC, but also challenge wherever we see the need in order that we can all improve our democratic process. But by and large, our mandate as accredited by the COMELEC is around voters registration and education. We do poll watching on election day, and I'm sure all of you have seen our volunteers in the various precincts where you voted and where they assisted you in what is called the voters assistance desks, manned predominantly by very young people who just want to give their time. To be furnished, importantly, with a 4th copy of 8 copies that the Vcms print prior to transmission, which of course helps us in the conduct of the unofficial parallel count, which you all probably saw that was conducted at the University of Santo Tomas this year. Next slide. So we did, it was a pandemic, but by and large, I think the registration campaign of both the COMELEC and all the citizens' arms resulted in additional voters, especially first-time voters, to our roster. Next slide. And it was very important for us to reach out to these new voters and first-time voters in order that they can really understand the technical process of how their votes are counted. And therefore, most importantly for us, the youth, we invited some of the top experts in the industry to relate to them how their votes are counted in very simple terms. This was very highly shared and highly engaged in, and we continue to try to expand knowledge about our automated system. We also did values-based programs. As you know, a lot of our volunteers come from the parishes across the country. And we had about 600,000 volunteers on election day. And it was important that we also shared with them various ways by which they can discern their votes. And we chose irrefutable concept of the preamble of the Constitution, which actually states 16 values of good citizenship. So in order for you to be a servant leader, we were hoping to impart that these values of makadiyos, makatao, makabayan, and makakalikasan are shared openly and discussed in various discernment circles across the country. This was very popular and was conducted over a period of 6 months. Of course, the job of poll watching will not be complete without the knowledge and the protocols of poll watching. We have been around since 2010, the first automated election, in educating our poll watchers in what are they looking for, what are the important elements of really first of all looking at all the materials saved from the hubs all the way to the precincts. We do observe printing of the ballots. We monitor the logistics of the transport of all the accountable materials, again, from the hubs in Manila all the way to the precincts on election day. There is what you call a final testing and sealing, where from May 2 to May 7 across the country, the COMELEC asked for volunteers and political parties to witness the conduct of voting upon 10 sample ballots to ensure that the machines were counting properly. Of course, we served as poll watchers on election day itself to help the voters feel safe that their ballots will be counted. And even after closing of the precincts, our volunteers worked to get the 4th copy of the election returns. Remember and step back and say, this is 107,000 precincts that we were collecting from after 7 p.m. on election day. It's not an easy job to pick up 107,000 copies and make its way to the University of Santo Tomas. I'll share some of that data in a while. Through the years, we have also been part of the COMELEC Advisory Council along with NAMFREL to really work with COMELEC and challenge, again, cooperate and challenge on various issues. We were there during the local source code review, not just us, but 67 other parties, including the political parties and various experts, to ensure that our software systems are at once supposed to do what they're doing, or we're supposed to do, but also that it is the same software that reaches us on election day. Next slide. So let me share that we really wanted to provide not just the voting public, but the world to view a very modern and efficient PPCRV. I think that conduct was, again, we will share the data, one of the most successful ways by which we were able to deliver our mandate. We were visited upon by many embassies and various stakeholders of the public. And we're very proud to say that instead of 2,000 volunteers, 12,000 came, and there was a lot of support for the conduct of the unofficial parallel count. The media was there with us all 24/7 as we received data in our transmission server. Next slide, please. It was also the highest rate of return of the ERs in the history of automated elections for us. where we received 92% of the 107,000 ERs we were expecting on election day. I cannot emphasize how difficult it is to pick up these ERs and make its way to the UST, but our young volunteers and our coordinators across the country made it happen. Next slide. So when the public is in doubt, let's answer with facts. And there were many questions on election day that we had to answer, even if it's outside of our mandate. Let's move to the next slides. I just chose the biggest ones. I think Commissioner Inting touched a bit on the speed of transmission. Tama nga naman, pag mabilis, nagdududa, pag mabagal, nagdududa. So let's just deal with facts. Next slide. Actually, the transmission rates of 2019, if we talk about data coming into the servers, despite the glitch, the data was coming in. 2019 was actually faster until 1 a.m., after which 2022 caught up. And I have to agree that the technologies today and the preparations for transmission, a call out to the telcos was quite intensive, and therefore we only want our elections to be faster and faster. So I am happy that we are seeing improvements all through time. Next slide. The other thing that was touched upon is the high return rate of the ERs, almost 99.26% received within the span of that week, which is again a good sign in terms of improvement of automated returns that were received by the transparency server shared with the media. Next slide. Let's talk about the VCM and SD card failures. While we will always aim and hope that the COMELEC can deliver 100%, technology, that's the nature of it. There will be some failures, and there were, but if we really consider, let's say, 500 people, voters per VCM, let's say that 250,000 voters, while still a very large number, we have to put it in context of about 45 to 50 million that may have showed up in the precincts. So still needs improvement, but really a lot of improvement versus the past. Next slide. Let's talk about block votes, and we do study our data, and that's the beauty of the automated election, that you can look back and forensic things. There were discussions and concerns that reached us at the UST that there were some precincts that showed 0 votes for Lenny. Can we look at that slide? And sure, there were 600 precincts that showed a 0 vote for Lenny, and here is a breakdown that has been shared in our sites. But it does correspond to less than 300,000 voters if you really take a look at those precincts. And then we can also share that there are precincts that gave 0 votes to candidate Marcos in the next slide, about 76 precincts, albeit smaller, with about 30,000 voters affected. By and large, if we put these two together, it would not have changed the outcome. We also studied the block voting phenomena of having 99% of the votes going to one candidate. And here you will see in pink VP Lenny's votes that went for her, and the balance that went for candidate Marcos. And you will see again that the effects of that across those precincts would not have affected the votes at 163,000 voters affected. We did that also for vice president position, and it was predominantly VP Sara Duterte's votes. And I guess since she's from the South, a number of them were Mindanao, and it affected about 245,000 of the voters, and again would not have changed the results. A bigger number is when we look at the null vote analysis. Null votes just say that, they probably voted for two candidates. OV means overvoting. So we looked at all the overvotes, and that corresponds to about 897,000 voters. Obviously, we will not know their intention because it's an overvote. There were more than 2 votes. And undervote is simply meaning that they didn't vote at all. So there's no conclusion we can make there. On vice president, about 633,000 votes were affected. And again, it would not have changed the outcome. We verified about 88,575 returns. It's about 82% of what we received at that time. And we did hit a match rate of 99.7%. Please note that we are looking at ERs, not ballots. That's the work of NAMFREL and Lente, which I'm sure Attorney Ona will speak about. But what we do is we take the election returns before transmission and compare it with what we received in the transparency server to make sure that there's no dagdag bawas happening. So we can safely say that this election cycle that no dagdag bawas was happening. Next slide. So we also talked about the pattern that was all over social media. Although it's really not in our remit, we did decide to answer it by inviting the UP, LaSalle, Ateneo, UST, and FEU to look at the data in the same manner that we were looking at it. Our conclusions were kept private until all the universities went through all their statistical analysis, and we did find that this pattern did not prove irregularity. It only proved the law of large numbers, which has been talked about a lot as well. So there are many articles regards to this pattern. It's not the first time we're seeing it. During President Noy, we had the 60-30-10 pattern that also showed. Next slide. In a few slides, had a talk with VP Lenny, and some conclusions were drawn, but that AES was really not the area where cheating may have happened, if at all. But yes, next slide. I think conclusions for us is it's not perfect. We're getting better in the technical sense, but perfecting this information as an entertaining art form, and in many, many sites, we have to accept that this is part of social media, but we still have to challenge with truth. And the way we do that is to challenge with data. And we hope that there's some thinking around this. It happens everywhere. Again, it's user-generated data in certain instances, some obviously professional work. So it's a big topic that we have to look at in the future. And yes, vote buying is very, very rampant in terms of the anecdotes reaching us. But I still think as a country, we have to take this more seriously. More court cases have to be filed. And I do hope that some convictions had in this ever problem of vote buying. So I guess that's just go through, Gracie, very quickly. I just wanted to say that the engagement of the youth during this election cycle was amazing, and that we should continue to engage them and harness their goodwill for the common good. And we just want to say that this was a more peaceful election that we've seen in the past. And the PPCRB will be here working for the public constantly to help in improving our voter experience and our democratic processes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Myla Villanueva, for sharing with us PPCRB's assessment of the last elections, as well as providing us with what PPCRB did and how you monitored the election process. And that's very valuable to our democratic system.
Thank you.
So thank you again. And I would like to tell our audience that you can ask your questions by using the Q&A box at the bottom. A few have already put down their questions, and our panel will answer these questions after our last speaker, who will speak on election volunteerism and the work of civil society moving forward. She is the Executive Director of the Legal Network for Truthful Elections, or LENTE, an organization that aims to ensure truthful elections and meaningful electoral participation for Filipino citizens. So I would like to present to you Attorney Ona Caritos, Executive Director of LENTE.
Good morning. Good morning to all the organizers of this event. Ako, Prof. Pico, Sir Ronnie. Good morning to all my co-panelists, Acting Chair, Inting, Attorney Rex, Ms. Myla. Maganda umaga po sa inyong lahat. I'll be presenting for the next 15 minutes election volunteerism and the role of civil society moving forward. So maganda umaga po ulit sa ating lahat at sa lahat ng mga kasama sa loob na ating Zoom webinar ngayong umaga. Okay. So again, I'm Attorney Ona. You can call me Ona. I'm the Executive Director of LENTE, and LENTE was briefly described by Prof. Pico. So hindi ko na po ipapakilala yung LENTE. But let's talk about election volunteerism. And when we talk about election volunteerism, most of us are familiar with the following. Pag election plus volunteer, we always associate with voter registration drive. I don't know if you remember last year, during the middle of the pandemic, a lot of organizations, a lot of groups were calling on people to register despite the ongoing pandemic. And this is an example of a civil society-led voter registration initiative, Ready to Vote. So because of initiatives like this, we had a record-breaking number of registrants for this election. So we're most familiar with Register to Vote, Ready to Vote. So we're familiar with the registration drives done by many organizations and groups all over the country. Another example that we're all, most of us are familiar with when it comes to election volunteerism is on voter education. And an example of this, I got this from the internet, is the one done by ADR and Democracy Watch last year. And because of the pandemic, a lot of us, including LENTE, PPCRV, NAMFREL, Democracy Watch, we shifted to conducting our voter education or public education initiatives via the different online platforms. And this is an example of election volunteerism, the conduct of voter education. And lastly, ito yung pinaka-familiar po tayo, and we always equate election volunteerism with election monitoring, and more specifically, election day monitoring. And the biggest volunteer group which has been able to mobilize hundreds of thousands of volunteers for the past elections is PPCRV, of course, sila Chair Myla. And I'm really happy to hear that most of the volunteers that they organize in this election is coming from the youth sector, because we need more and more young people to be part of this important work that we're doing. Okay? But when we take a look at the election cycle, I always say in my presentations, since time immemorial, that election volunteerism work, sometimes focuses on just a number of stages of the electoral cycle. If we take a look again at the previous slide, we're talking about voter registration, voter education, election monitoring, and when we place it in the election cycle, some of this work that we're all familiar with, or most of us are familiar with, pwede po natin siya ilagay during registration, during voting operations, and electoral campaigning. So if we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 slices here, most of the organizations, groups focus on election work are only working on the 3 stages of the electoral cycle: voting operations, electoral campaigning, and registration. And most of the time, the remaining 5 slices of this electoral cycle, wala na masyado pong nagtatrabaho, or not a lot of groups or organizations are working in the remaining 5 slices of the pie. So I think when we talk about election volunteerism, we also need to take a look at the electoral cycle, because when we appreciate the elections, or when we look at the elections as not just being an election day or a one-day event, and we look at it as a cycle, then our work, or the scope of our work, expands. Okay. So when we talk about election volunteerism, there's something more, and there's more to be done. Example, when it comes to voter registration, last year, a pilot voter registration drive was implemented by DILG, NCDA, NCIP, NAPSI, and Lente, wherein we focus on the vulnerable sectors during the voter registration. Because if you remember, last year, one of the hardest hit industry or service was on transportation. And yung pinaka po na apektuhan as to the limited transportation available to the general population is the ones affected are the vulnerable sectors. So we piloted a voter registration drive for the vulnerable sectors, for PWDs, older persons, mga katutubo po, and mga matatanda, mga older persons natin, and mga bata, kasi we consider them as part of the vulnerable sector last year. So we initiated a pilot voter registration drive. So this is aside from the usual voter registration advocacy that we do, that we encourage people to register. So this is something more, or this is the more when it comes to doing voter registration drive. And this is a poster on the Department of Education requesting higher compensation for our electoral poll workers. Most of our electoral workers or electoral board members are coming from the Department of Education. And just to give a bit of context about this poster, for the longest time, DepEd could not do something like this. Yung magre-request po sila sa COMELEC ng higher compensation. But because of a law passed 2016 April, o yung tinatawag po natin na ESRA, or Election Service Reform Act, there's now a legal basis for DepEd to request for a higher honorarium for our poll workers. And our teachers now can opt out if they do not want to serve as poll workers. And bakit ko po sinasabi lahat to? Because this law stems from the effort of civil society groups, of groups like Teachers Dignity Coalition, of ACT, Alliance of Concerned Teachers, and other civil society organizations which pushed for the passage of the Election Service Reform Act. So ito po yung sinasabi ko sa inyo, ito po yung sinasabi sa atin na, but wait, there's more, guys. Whenever we do election work, sometimes we're just focused on election day monitoring, we're focused on conducting advocacy activities and voter registration. But when we think about election work, I think we also need to focus on the other slice, or the other slice in the pie, which is on legal reform. And this is something that we could probably work on in this new Congress. So ayan po yung pinanggagalingan ng request for higher honorarium, a law which was advocated by civil society groups for its passage last April 2016. Another program or another policy change which was initiated and thankfully approved by the Commission on Elections was on increasing accessibility of our elections to Indigenous people. You can see in this screenshot of a news coverage of an event in COMELEC that the accessible voting center and separate polling places for Indigenous peoples was launched last April 2016. Just a bit of background, voting for Indigenous people or for our katutubo, it's not that easy compared to the rest of the voting population. For example, when you woke up last May 9, 2022, most of us just took a jeepney or walked to our voting center for us to exercise our right to vote. But for most of our Indigenous people's population, voting population, because they're located in far-flung communities, not close to the center of our towns and municipalities, they have to walk for a number of hours, or they really have to spend for their transportation for them to exercise their right to vote. Kasi masyado pong malayo yung kanilang mga botohan, yung kanilang mga communities sa kanilang mga pagbobotohan. So what civil society organizations did, what IP organizations did, what SLB did, what Simbahang Lingkod ng Bayan organization did was to lobby and to request and to ask COMELEC to implement accessibility or the accessible voting center for the Indigenous people. And this was piloted in Mindoro, the two Mindoros last 2016. And fortunately, this program has been continued and has been taken up by the Commission on Elections as part of their regular work, or what we always use in developmental work na mainstream na yung trabahong to. And that's because of push of advocacy of groups coming from the different groups coming from the civil society. So this is another component of something more that we could do in the election. Another, this is a poster of a talk by the former VSO director, Attorney Jovi Balangkit. The VSO, or the Vulnerable Sector Office, is the newest established office in the Commission on Elections. The VSO, as its name implies, it's an office in the Commission on Elections which focuses on the vulnerable sectors, on the voting challenges of persons with disability, Indigenous people, PDLs. So it's an office dedicated to the vulnerable sectors. And for everyone's information, the creation of this office was again through the efforts of different groups, IP groups, PWD groups, older person groups, and PDL groups, which work and which again ask COMELEC, why don't you have a particular office in your structure or in your bureaucracy to focus exclusively on the challenges or the situation faced by vulnerable sectors? And fortunately, this office was created around December 2019, right in time before the pandemic started more than 2 years ago. And we see the VSO, or the Vulnerable Sector Office, at work in the numerous voters education drive that they conducted on accessibility of the elections for the vulnerable sectors. Okay. But again, there's always something more. When we talk about election volunteerism, I think we also need to talk about targeted or focused election volunteerism. And when we talk about focused election volunteerism, there's a need to change. There's a need for a change in the behavior of the voting population, election stakeholder like the Commission on Elections. And when we want a change in the behavior of the voting population or the election stakeholder like the Commission on Elections, we do it via advocacy, just like what I discussed earlier, or we do it via reform. Via a COMELEC resolution. The VSO, or the Vulnerable Sector Office, was created via a COMELEC resolution, or we do it via a congressional action. ESRA, or the Election Service Reform Act, was a congressional action which gave our public school teachers the option to serve or not in the elections. So there's always something more when we talk about election volunteerism. And when we talk about the role of civil society moving forward, I think we need to go back to the electoral cycle. I discussed earlier on the limitation or the focus of most of civil society groups. We're always focused on, I think, the 3 slices of the electoral cycle. We talk about the electoral cycle pie. But during this time, I think we could focus on the fight for the legal framework. We're about to enter a new Congress by July. We will be entering the 19th Congress and the first regular section. It's time for us for evaluation. Ako po nasa COMELEC ngayon, Baguio, because we're currently evaluating the conduct of the recently concluded conduct of the random manual audit. But I think for civil society, the best time to move forward, policy and advocacy-wise, is now. Because this is the best time to ask our legislator, our legislature, our Commission on Elections changes in the work or in the policy that they've always been implementing in our elections, or changes in our laws that we saw was deficient in the conduct of the last election. And in the last 2022 national and local elections, and this is my last slide, we saw how unresponsive the legal framework was. I don't want to use the term old, but we really have an old legal framework. For example, when we talk about voter registration, the law which is the baseline for our voter registration effort or our voter registration framework was passed around, I think, 1997. And a lot of things have happened since then, since the passage of the Voter Registration Act. And we saw how old it was during the pandemic. A lot of us were questioning, why did COMELEC had to require us to appear personally before them to reactivate our voter registration when in fact they already have our data available? Why can't they just be like Shopee or Lazada that we can do everything online given that they already have our data? So we saw how unresponsive our framework was on voter registration. So moving forward, I think there's really a need, and Lente in our on our part, we see that there's a need to make our voter registration act more accessible and more inclusive. And a big opportunity in the horizon for all of us is to study how we could make use of the national ID law on how to make it more responsive and how to use the national ID database for COMELEC. How COMELEC can use the national ID database to make our voter registration more accessible and more inclusive. We're looking at the example in other countries that we're in. We see voters who apply for driver's license who can just tick off a box that would allow the agency in charge for issuance of the driver's license to share the data of that individual to the election management body of that state. So that's our vision, and that's our hope for the future of voter registration in the country, to make it more accessible and inclusive. Kasi nandiyan na po andyan na yung national ID law. Why not make use of that national ID law database to make our voter registration database more accessible and more inclusive? Let's now talk about campaign finance. We saw in the last election how unrealistic our spending limit was. And for everyone's information, our law capping the spending limit of politicians and political parties, it was passed more than 30 years ago. Siyempre, alam naman po natin lahat that yung piso 30 years ago is not the piso now. According to a computation by NEDA in one of the hearings that I attended at the Senate, the 10 peso spending limit for presidential and vice presidential candidates, it should be 30 pesos right now. And unfortunately, although this has been a pending reform before our Congress for the longest time, this has not been taken up by our Congress. So this is, I think, this is the best time to call on and pressure our Congress to finally amend this unrealistic spending limit that we have for our politicians and political parties. Why do we need to amend this unrealistic spending limit? Because our candidates, our politicians, our political parties, they're forced to underdeclare their expenses. Siyempre po, when you have an unrealistic spending limit, you can't submit your truthful SOSE or statement of contributions and expenditures, because you'll be disqualified from public office if you go beyond the spending limit. So there's a need to change this provision in our law to make it easier and to make it more realistic according to the times now. And when we also talk about campaign finance, we have to recognize that we don't have yet a framework on online campaigning. COMELEC is really innovative in the sense that they've been using the Fair Election Act as basis for somehow regulating online campaigning. We have a provision in COMELEC's resolution for the IRR of the Fair Election Act that political parties and candidates need to report their official online accounts. And that's the best that COMELEC could do when it comes to online campaigning. So there's a need to really revise our law to include online campaigning in the framework that we currently have. Lastly, let's talk about decreasing electoral competitiveness. In the 2019 national and local elections, we had more than 500 unopposed positions in the local races. In this election, we now have more than 800 unopposed positions in the local races. So we can see from the data that wala na ibang tumatakbo. A lot of our political dynasties and political families are consolidating their powers and even branching out to nearby provinces. So I think we need to really look at this problem in our elections. Hindi po ito masyado pinag-uusapan, but this is a growing problem in our elections. How our elections has become ano na lang siya, imprimatur. No one's running in our elections anymore, especially in the local races. But lastly, when we talk about decreasing electoral competitiveness, we need to mention the party-list system, because we saw in this election, not only in this election, but in the last 3 or 4 major elections, how political dynasties and how political families have used the party-list system as another way to gain a seat in Congress. Because it's easier for them to get that one seat using the party-list system. Because if you're a family controlling a province, for example, in this election, the last group which got the last seat in the party-list system, they had to get 300,000 votes to get that last seat in the party-list system. So if you're a political family and you're controlling a province, or you're controlling a region, when you have a number of provinces in that region under your family's control, yung 300,000 votes na yan is easy for you to get. So the party list system has been used as a backdoor entry point for political families, for political dynasties to gain another seat in Congress, basically to gain more power in our government. And I think one simple but albeit I think very hard reform that we could all work on is to have an anti-dynasty provision in our party list act. So for us to exclude the relatives of those already in power to be included as nominees in the party list system. So I think this is a big role that civil society groups like us can do moving forward, especially in this first year after the conduct of the May elections. We need to focus on reform. We need to focus on advocacy to change the problems that we saw or that we encountered in the previous election. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much again to StatBase ADR Institute and to Democracy Watch for giving us this platform. Magandang umaga po ulit sa ating lahat.
Thank you very much, Attorney Ona Caritos, for those excellent recommendations for policy reform. Personally, I just renewed my driver's license and my passport, and it took me just a few minutes. So perhaps interoperability can really be pursued, and the biometrics that were taken can also be used by COMELEC. Of course, given the privacy issues. So that can be a subject for discussion. So now let's proceed to our open forum. There are a few questions here. A number have been answered. Thank you, Attorney John Rex Lodianco and Professor Ronnie Holmes for answering those questions. But there are still open questions here. I believe Attorney Lodianco can answer this. So let me read this question. Unnecessarily magnifying the issues is a pretty harmful statement. You were not the one standing in line in the precincts for 15 hours, waiting for the machines and SD cards. You were not one of the people who had to give up with voting or yield to a mode of voting they did not want because the precincts were so cramped and had no accommodation. You were not one of the people whose votes were bought, coerced, or replaced. You do not have the right to minimize people's experiences. So apparently from somebody who experienced something different from the general population's perspective on the election. Before you answer, Attorney Lodianco, there is another question here from Salvador Aksay. In the 1st District of Iloilo, okay, let me read that again. Massive vote buying has been conducted with people receiving envelopes with money and sample ballots of candidates from national and local candidates. This happens right in the presence of police and even COMELEC in flagrante delicto. Just want to know, why did the police and the COMELEC not act to arrest the persons giving the envelopes with money? Okay, another question for COMELEC from Ivel John Santos. How many registered voters were unable to vote in the May elections? And a final one, we are just gathering because of limited time, gathering the questions. For the COMELEC, during my coverage of the elections, some voters from the senior and PWD sectors were not able to avail of the APPS EAPPs due to the 5 p.m. deadline. One voter who suffered from stroke had to be carried to the 3rd floor in a wheelchair. May I know what was the logic behind that? Why not make it the same to the regular vote closing hours? Kasi some of those that I interviewed didn't really know that there was a separate deadline for EAPPs and APPs voting. Attorney John Rex, were you able to get all of this series of questions?
Okay, sir. Can you just remind me if I missed some? Insofar as the term unnecessarily magnify, I did not use the term. I have never mentioned the word. And in fact, Commissioner Inting had highlighted that we indeed apologize and the elections were indeed far from being perfect. And these are the matters which will be subject of our assessment internally, and we hope to improve on it in the future. That is precisely the reason why COMELEC Resolution 10759 was promulgated. In fact, as it was stated in section, let me just check, section 8 of Resolution 10759, it specifically addresses the point wherein in case the VCM malfunctions, we have 2 options for the voters po, no? The first one is that they could proceed in casting their votes by shading their ballots, and these ballots will be temporarily placed in an envelope for rejected ballots or the one used for half-turned ballots and deposited with the electoral boards, which will then be batch fed at the end of the voting hours. The second option is for them to wait for the VCM malfunction to be resolved or the replacement VCM to arrive for them to be able to personally feed the ballot into the machines. So even before this scenario had happened, we had already envisioned it. And machines being machines, of course, there will always be a failure rate. We are not necessarily minimizing the effect of the 447 machines that I had mentioned, which malfunctions. Of course, the voters there suffered much inconvenience and discomfort. But then again, contingency measures are in place, and then those who had waited opted for the second option, opted for the second avail of the second option. The others were able to leave the ballots confidently under the watch of the electoral boards and the watchers, and these were publicly batch fed into the machines naman. And insofar as those which were batch fed, we had received no complaints. Insofar as that they did not receive, of course, the voter receipt. Wala na po kasing pagbibigyan nun. The voter receipt were then placed in receptacles directly without being examined upon. Secondly, in the incident in Iloilo, I hope that the person who reported this could give me more information. I will have to check with the PNP and of course the COMELEC Law Department with this po, no? If indeed the Iloilo case is one of the 17 that we had docketed, we will likewise check with the National Prosecution Service if indeed this case is already docketed under their prosecutorial service. Dalawa po kasi ang pwedeng pag-file ng case, isa sa Law Department, isa po doon sa National Prosecution Service. We have to check this. I'll just leave the number po at the my number and email at the perhaps the chat page, so that I hope the person had supplied information could give me more details so that I could inquire on this. The second one was the one that it's really again unfortunate that the senior citizen had collapsed. It's something that COMELEC really did not want to happen. Again, this will form part of our assessment and those areas for improvement that we indeed really need to work on. The elections is not perfect, but your COMELEC really is working hard on this one. Did I miss any question, Dr. Magno, sir?
The question from Mr. Santos, how many registered voters were unable to vote?
Okay, based on the voter turnout, let me just check. For the local registered voters, we have 65,745,526 and 55,290,821 voted. So a little less or a little more than a million did not vote, either by choice or whatever incident happened. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So here's a question from Ellen Tordesillas. I think this is for Professor Holmes. Who are these most media practitioners who were considered by 41% of the respondents as fair?
Kiko, I actually answered Ellen in the Q&A box, but I think the question really is that we left it to the respondents to really reflect on who are those most influential media practitioners. So we did not have the space to ask them to identify who they think are influential media practitioners. We just asked the question from their perspective, have most influential media practitioners been fair and balanced with regard to their coverage of the elections?
Thank you, Ronnie. Let me read this question. I think this can be answered by all the members of the panel. With so much information going around, especially online, how can we, the common Filipino people, distinguish between truth and propaganda? How do we know that the facts presented here indeed are facts and not products of manipulation? How can we know that the presenters and the institutions they present are trustworthy? So I think this is in reference also to what Myla mentioned about the disinformation. That's a challenge to our democracy. And maybe I can just relate it to the also one of the test statements used by Pulse Asia, whether the people or the citizens believe that there has been substantive discussion of programs and issues. I think this has reference to the conduct of debates, and I'll give the last the opportunity to Attorney Laujanco later, but I'll ask first Myla, how would you respond to this question? And again, you emphasize the importance of addressing this information.
Yes, I think there was so much going around, especially in a very polarized and emotional election. So we decided, at least at PPCRV, to ensure that we only deal with facts whenever we answered all the be questions surrounding even our own work. And I encourage especially our media partners to conduct more awareness surrounding how they actually fact check, what are the processes in our trusted media that they have to go through vis-a-vis just the regular, bloggers. Not that I'm putting that down, but I think we have to just talk about the protocols of how we fact check and increase the credibility also constantly of the difference between user-generated content and our trusted media. So I think facts commonly shared again and again is helpful, and that's how we're conducting ourselves at the PPCRV.
Thank you, Myla. Attorney Ona.
Thank you, Prof. Kiko. I think our problem with disinformation, the way to deal with it is a two-way responsibility. It's not always on for example, the civil society organization. I think it's the responsibility of everyone to be open to discussion, because we saw in this election, especially in this election, a lot of disinformation going around. Specifically, let me give you an example on the RMA. One of the problems faced early on by the conduct of the random manual audit was the allegation that the polling places were pre-selected. So early on, we decided to conduct a number of webinars, learning sessions on how the RMA would be conducted and how the selection of the polling places were conducted. But in these webinars, there's always that person who would not believe the data or information that we're saying. So aside from that information, there's always that open invitation for them to go actually to Diamond Hotel to be able to witness personally the conduct of the random manual audit. Kasi as we always say, the proof is in the pudding. Kailangan makita mo for you to believe the information. So I think the problem is with disinformation, our problem with disinformation, it's a two-way obligation. We need to have an open mind. We need to be open to discussion. We need to be open to the idea that not all that we see and not all that we hear in the different online platforms are true, or kahit yung sumagaling sa mga nanay at tatay natin. So we need to study and research and be open. And we need to study and research and be open to discussion.
Thank you, Attorney Ona. Professor Holmes, regarding that test statement on whether happy ba yung mga Pinoy na kaunti lang yung, or substantive ba yung discussion of programs, campaign platforms and programs?
Well, basically, 4 sa 10 ang naniniwalang medyo may sustansya yung diskusyon tungkol sa mga usapin at programa patungkol papunta doon sa eleksyon ng Mayo. Siguro nagpapakita rin ito na nakatulong na rin yung media sa pangkalatan sa pagpapalaganap ng impormasyon tungkol sa anong mahalagang dapat pag-usapan. Pero dahil sa 4 lang sa 10 ito, siguro sa susunod na eleksyon dapat mas malawakan yung pagkakataon ibibigay sa lahat ng kandidato, lalo na sa lokal, no? Na marinig ang kanilang mga plataforma. Ang problema natin talaga, Kiko, I think you know it as a political scientist, basically people are far removed when it comes to national positions, far removed from government, national or central government. And I think there's really a need for us to increase the information that they receive even prior to the election so that they can be more engaged in terms of really articulating their aspirations to all the candidates come election day.
So perhaps yung voters' education can be linked to civic education if the electoral cycle is not just seen as a one-day event, but as
it's really a continuing political education, because I think for the most part, what we do get really is just this periodic exercise where people are informed. But if people are informed only periodically, how much engaged will they be? They'll just be doing this on a one-shot basis. rather than looking at whether the experiences in the past 3 years or their quality of life has improved, and whether they can attribute that to the candidates who are aspiring to become or to be re-elected or aspiring to become elected officials.
Thank you, Professor Holmes. I'll ask Attorney Laujanco to for final opinion. But before doing so, there's another question here from the media for COMELEC. Ano po reaction nyo regarding the 3 House bills that have been filed so far seeking to postpone the upcoming barangay election? So that's about the barangay elections. But Attorney Laujanco, yung opinion of a number of people that there were not enough debates, or maybe there were debates but lack of participation from the candidates themselves. At the national level, Professor Holmes is mentioning at the local level, yung kulang rin yung debate sa local level. So, Attorney Laujanco.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Magno. Insofar as the absence of some candidates during debates, this was readily addressed by Commissioner Garcia during the conduct of our own debates. Unfortunately, there is no law penalizing non-attendance even in COMELEC initiated debates. We really hope that the legislation will be passed to address this. As we all know, any penalty must be under the auspices of a Republic Act or a legislation for such matter to be fully implemented by COMELEC. Hindi naman po kasi lawmaker ang COMELEC, kundi we're just enforcers and administrators of election laws. Also, on the issue of the massive disinformation, yes, we really had faced for the first time the high level of intensity of disinformation insofar as elections are concerned. That is why during our daily briefing, and as in compliance with the marching orders of then Chairman Pangarungan and under the advisorship of Commissioner Garcia, the policy adopted by the Commission is to readily address any and all questions or any and all disinformations circulating in social medias and other channels. Kaya kung makikita nyo po during the daily noon press briefing, we are addressing on the spot any question, any issue, to the point of being able to readily address even before any members of our dear partner medias were questioning, na-address na namin po yung issues. This is also the reason why during those briefings that I had mentioned, we had been calling on and appealing to our citizenry to listen only to credible media partners. We ask them to listen and view our election partners, Lente, PPCRV, NAMFREL, and other watchdogs. Kaya nga po hinihikayat namin sila again and again, at we were not tiring in inviting them. Kung makikinig lamang sila, please do not just listen on Facebook or any other social media that's not fact-based. Listen to those with credibility. We have partners that that is why Commission on Elections have been partnering with so many organizations, public interest organizations, election watchdogs, as well as the media, in order to ensure the public that we were dispensing accurate and reliable information in so far as elections are concerned. And we do hope we could sustain and continue with this. Lastly, on the barangay issue, of course, the setting of the December 5, 2022 elections is based on Republic Act 11642, if I'm not mistaken. So until such time that a new Republic Act is passed into law, setting, resetting, postponing, or rescheduling, COMELEC shall continue to comply with the dictates of Republic Act 11642 and continue with our preparations for the BSKE po. At any rate, if there is any legislation, we will likewise comply with that and cease our preparations. Hindi naman po masasayang yung preparations namin, as primarily we had done 3 things to prepare for the BSKE. First is the registration. Yung registration is one-time registration under Republic Act 8189. And even if the BSKE will not push through on December, that registration will serve its purpose and the new registrants can vote in the succeeding elections. Insofar as the other 2 preparations, the promulgation of resolutions, we could readily re-promulgate and issue other resolutions to govern the BSKE should it be reset to a later date. And lastly, the procurement part. Any and all goods and services to be procured can be readily used in a date to be set by any Republic Act postponing the elections. We had done this in 2018, wherein the ballots and other accountable forms were dated differently from the day of the elections. It could be readily authorized using by virtue of a COMELEC resolution. So wala naman pong nasasayang dun sa aming preparations for the BSK. And we're just hoping and praying po that if indeed any Republic Act will come out, it should come out soon po, the soonest possible time, so that we could postpone any other procurements that we had not concluded din naman. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Attorney Laujanco. At this point, we don't have time. This has been a very interesting and productive discussion. But unfortunately, we have no time left. Perhaps there should be a follow-up forum. To formally thank our panelists, I would like to call the president of Strat-Based ADR Institute, Professor Victor Andres Dindo Manhit, to provide us the closing remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Kiko. Thank you to our speakers, Dr. Ronnie Holmes, for presenting how the public saw the elections. Very important to understand the public. Chair, PPCRV Chair, Myla Villanueva, civil society is always key, Attorney Ona. Of course, our agencies, government, COMELEC has played an important role, Commissioner Enting, and the COMELEC leadership and the team that ensured the success of the 2022 election. Allow me to share my thoughts after listening to all the presentations. You know, in the Strat-Based Institute, our project called the Democracy Watch Philippines, which was started 2013, we've always believed that the electoral process in the country has taken leaps forwards and it started automating its polls in 2010 or 12 years ago. Today, we have seen the Filipinos indeed believe in the value of automation. As Dr. Ronnie shared with us, 89% of Filipinos are satisfied with the automated polling system, with 92% stating that the use of voting counting machines was easy and convenient for them. We at the Institute are glad that the country continues to implement election automation, as it yields great benefits for our electoral process. It no longer takes months to count the votes. I remember 2004, nearly more than a month and a half, if I recall. Electoral fraud, dagdag bawas, or as some would say at the grassroots level, hinahabol ang boto, can no longer occur with automated elections. In the just matters of ours, we could already see who won the various national and local electoral races back in May 9. I remember I was in live TV at TV5 with Ted Filon and Luchi Cruz at 10:30 in the evening. I said, I think we can call the election. That now President Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. won, given the results. So as we continue to learn from this experience, I'd like to emphasize what we saw in this commission study. And we have done this in 2016 election, 2019 election, 2022 election. That 82% of Filipinos trust the result of the 2022 election. They believe the results are accurate and credible. It's very important because we need a legitimate government to move us forward. And this cuts across location, geographic location, age group, and other demographics. And Filipinos as well says 72%. The main benefit of automation is faster results. And that's what we saw. That's what we felt. That's what we valued. Meanwhile, we have 89% of Filipinos saying they would like to see automated voting continue in future elections. Similar numbers to a survey our partner ran in 2019 and 2016. 89% and 88% of citizens responded in favor of continuing automated elections, respectively. So I really don't understand why there is always this call for hybrid election, for a return to the past, when data tells us differently. Moreover, we have seen how civil society groups have also played a key role during our recent election. We continue to be grateful, thankful, the volunteers, leadership of the Parish Pastoral Council for Responsible Voting, the Legal Network for Truthful Elections, for their continued and tireless efforts in protecting the citizens' right to vote and for helping citizens in the casting of the ballot. For democracy to flourish in the country, it is essential that Filipinos can freely participate in voting and other government-related processes. Today, through the studies presented this morning, we have heard the voice of the Filipino people and how it is important to continue to listen to what Filipinos have to say about our country. As we are in the beginning of a new administration, it is our hope that this current government also hears what citizens are saying and responds accordingly to public needs for the greater good of the country. We hope that the newly elected government, the Marcos Jr. administration, his team, will address issues that matter to Filipinos and in so doing move our country beyond the various crises we have experienced in over 2 years of this pandemic. I take this opportunity to thank everyone again, our participants. As I've said in my other commentaries, we need to govern beyond the crisis. And it entails a new type of leadership that thinks and acts beyond politics. Good morning, thank you, and we will continue to fight for a true Filipino democracy.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Myla, Attorney Ona, thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.